To me, this church is kind of a time warp. 30 years ago, when I drove to church at First Jefferson, I would often be greeted at the door by Howard McMahon. And then I would go into the kitchen, and there would be Myrtle McMahon. And then we would start the service, and sitting at the piano bench would be Nancy Bird. And that all happened again this morning. Fascinating. What is the difference between an optimist and a pessimist? The optimist says, this is the best of all possible worlds. And the pessimist says, it sure is. Our world today is in pretty bad shape. There are lots of reasons and things to expect are going to go wrong. We have to live with changing climate, gridlocked government in Washington, an unfair and unbalanced economy, ghastly, unfinished wars, frightful acts of violence in nature, and violence among human beings. You and I can't change all that, but we can make changes in our own little piece of the world. And I believe the quality of life which we experience is largely determined by whether we decide to live in hope or in despair. And I want to make a hard case today for hope. I care about the quality of life that you experience, that I experience, and I think optimism gets the better results. Pessimism makes us depressed, non-functional, unhappy, not fun to be around. Optimism makes us hopeful, looking for new options, for solutions, for new opportunities, new adventures. It not only makes us functional, but it breeds a survivor mentality and some of the playfulness that gives so much zest to life. So, how do we become optimists? Here comes a story. This is one of my favorites. Once upon a time, there was a Chinese farmer. How many of you have heard this story? Jane, raise your hand. Yes. So you can help me tell it. All right. He owned a beautiful champion horse, and that horse was his favorite possession. And one night, while he was sleeping, the horse jumped the fence and ran away into the hills. The neighbors came over to offer their sympathy. They said, "Isn't this terrible? Your prize horse has run away." And the farmer replied, "Maybe it's bad, maybe it's good. We don't know yet. Time will tell." The next morning, that champion horse came back, and behind him were 10 more beautiful horses. He rounded them up, and he led them right into the farmyard, and the farmer closed the gate quickly behind him. The neighbors came over to offer congratulations. "Isn't it wonderful? Your horse ran away and then came back with 10 more horses, and now you have 11 beautiful horses." Then the farmer said, "Maybe it's bad, maybe it's good. We don't know yet. Time will tell." At dawn the next day, the farmer's son went out to see those horses, and one of them kicked him, and he broke his leg. The neighbors came over to sympathize. "Isn't it terrible? Your horse ran away, came back with 10 more horses, but then kicked your son, and now he can't help you with the farm work." The farmer said, now you know what he said, "Help me. Maybe it's bad, maybe it's good. We don't know yet. Time will tell." The next day, the emperor declared war on a nearby nation and sent officials out to every village to conscript soldiers. The neighbors came over to offer sympathy. because every young man was taken except one. Isn't it terrible? Your horse ran away, came back with 10 more, kicked your son in the leg so he couldn't help you with the farm work, but then he wasn't able to go to war. Oh, it's not terrible, it's wonderful, isn't it? And the farmer said, maybe it's bad, maybe it's good. We don't know yet. Time will tell. And so it goes. So, how do we become optimists? Be patient. Wait. See how things will turn out in the long run. Because time will tell. How I would love to tell our president that his health reform is going to work out in the long run if we just wait and see. So first, be patient. Second, assume the best. Now, here comes your homework. So get out a pencil. When you go home or get to the nearest library, go to a computer and Google Antoinette Tough. Antoinette Tough. Decatur, Georgia. Her story was in the news last August, and it is an incredible, true tale. It begins when a man slipped into a packed elementary school with an AK-47 rifle. This was in Decatur, Georgia. He went into the school office and he shot at the floor, and then he darted between there and the outside, shooting here and there, but not hitting anyone. Antoinette Tough was working in that office as a secretary. She did not run. She called 911. Now, this school had trained their staff how to handle this kind of an emergency. And Antoinette signaled to 2 other staff to start a phone tree to tell teachers to lock certain doors and lead those children to safety. Antoinette was scared to death, but she controlled her fear, and she stood her ground, and she talked calmly to this gunman. She told him about her personal life struggles with illness, with relationships. She told him about her pain, and then she sympathized with his struggles and with his pain. And she told him she cared about him. She offered to walk outside with him, to surrender so the police would not shoot him. The story ends with 800 children safely outside, and the gunman who did put down his gun and was taken peacefully by the police for questioning and help. It was a possible dire tragedy, but it ended peacefully with no one hurt. Antoinette Tough had assumed the best. She assumed that her training would work. She put her heart into her words and what she did, and she was able to change her small piece of the world. So Google Antoinette Tough, Decatur, Georgia, and read the whole story. You can remember this name because she was one tough lady. Only she spells it T-U-F-F. Now, we Unitarian Universalists are very fortunate. We have our own theologian, James Luther Adams, who has written extensively about optimism. Dr. Adams taught at the Harvard Divinity School. I met him in 1987 when First Jefferson sent me there for a sabbatical one semester. And Dr. Adams described the 5 pillars on which he bases his liberal religious faith. The 5th pillar he calls ultimate optimism. He has an ultimately hopeful view of human progress. He believes that we are indeed evolving from lower to higher life forms. And he takes the theological stance that all human beings, every one of us, are basically worthwhile, basically valuable, basically capable of great good and of great growth. He is not blind to the mistakes and the corruption which we commit, but he thinks we can learn from those mistakes. Every setback, every injustice, every war is a revelation of values which human beings consider important enough to fight for, to die for. Adams writes, "War is a relentless revealer. It presents the human powers and aspirations as dramatically as does peace." Unfortunately, Dr. Adams is now deceased, but his books live on, and a good one to start with, probably many of you have read it, is called On Being Human Religiously, and it's available through the UUA bookstore. If you have a bookstore, I recommend that you pick some up. In A Free Faith, Adams says, we are called to recognize the tragic dimensions of human life, yes, the pain, the injustice, and at the same time, we are called to admit that there is hope. There are possibilities for change and progress. Think of the reformers, the philosophers, the painters, the musicians, all the artists that have held a vision of a peaceful, just world up to us. Their work keeps that vision before us. Adams wants us to keep sight of that vision, to be optimists, even when the ugly realities of daily life might breed cynicism. Now, here comes my favorite elevator speech about Unitarian Universalism. Do you know what an elevator speech is? You discussed that concept. Okay, a short speech that explains it all. Between the third and the sixth floor. Okay, here it comes. Quote, "The prophetic quality of liberal humanism, our unique and salvific message, is our claim that human beings are ultimately good, and society is ultimately perfectible, and even, well, at least, improvable." I'm going to read that again. The prophetic quality of liberal humanism, our unique and salvific message, is our claim that human beings are ultimately good, and that human society is ultimately perfectible, or at least improvable. Thus says our theologian, James Luther Adams, and I say, right on, up with optimism. So how do you become optimistic? Be patient, wait for a better outcome, and assume it will come. Assume the best. Dare to be optimistic that ultimately good will surface. Also, dare to have hopes, dreams, goals. Today you have heard from me the philosophy of the Chinese farmer, the heroism of Antoinette Tuff, the wisdom of James Luther Adams, and now it's time for the last words about a Unitarian saint. This is a true story. It's called Eleanor, who planted trees. It begins on a sidewalk in a small town in Massachusetts, Belmont, Massachusetts, 35 years ago. It was lunchtime, and I left my office at the church and walked across the street to a Greek deli to pick up a sandwich for lunch. As I left the deli, and smells coming out of the street, they're so wonderful, I saw Eleanor, and I stopped, frozen in midair. She was a strange sight. She was striding down this steep hill from her home down into the very center of Belmont. She was a tiny woman, age 74 at that time. She wore an old heavy tweed coat against the cold March wind, and a scarf was tied under her head so her hair was flat, evoking images of a Russian peasant woman. Sturdy hiking shoes reinforced that image. In one hand, she carried a garden shovel, and in the other, she had, believe it or not, an 8-foot sapling tree, the roots wrapped up in burlap. Here she comes. What in the world could she be up to? She was about 100 feet away from me, but I could see she had this funny look on her face, watchful, almost furtive. Her eyes darted about searchingly, and her jaw was rather grimly set. Uh-oh, I thought. Eleanor is in her determined mode, and I had seen that look before, and it meant something interesting was going to happen. You probably guessed. She carried that tree out to a triangle of grass, which was in the center of an intersection of 3 streets right outside this deli. And there, in the center of town, she plunked down the tree and began to dig a hole. When I walked up and offered to help, she never batted an eye. She just said, "Good, here, you take the shovel and dig. I'll get the burlap off the roots. We have to work fast. We may get in trouble." I figured as much, and you never saw a hole get dug so fast. Cars went by on 3 sides, but no one appeared to notice us. We dropped the tree in place, put the dirt back, and stamped it down. And then Eleanor said with a mischievous grin, "Let's get out of here." So we walked over to the church, and over my sandwich and coffee, Eleanor explained that she had been petitioning the town meeting in Belmont several times for years to plant more trees, but they rarely got around to it. So, when their response wasn't quick enough, then she acted on her own. She had 2 acres of land up there at the top of the hill, and whenever a sapling tree grew up and was big enough, she would pick it up, she would dig it up, and then go plant it somewhere. She had been doing this for years on town and park and library and school properties. She explained you must plant well before the grass mowing season to give the tree time to get established before somebody knocks it down or notices it even. She had learned nobody sees the small saplings. We're talking a trunk about that big. And by the time the tree is big enough to catch people's eye, it's pretty and nobody would want to cut it there. So we drove around town and she showed me the results of 30 years of furtive tree planting. In the dry years, she had carried buckets of water in her car to water these trees, keep them alive. She was quite proud of her trees and genuinely sad about the ones that had not survived. She asked me to stop at the edge of a public park and to get out, and we went over and stood there and looked at the grass. And I said, "Eleanor, what are we looking at?" And she said, "There should be a maple tree here, but it died." And there was a moment of silence. And then she spoke as though she wanted to comfort me. "They don't all make it, you know. But you must always plant trees, whether they live or not, because some will live, and trees are good for the soul." So how do we become optimists? We are patient. We assume the best. We try to be ultimate optimists. We have dreams and hopes and goals, and we hold them close. So keep the faith that human beings are ultimately good. Keep the faith that society is ultimately perfectible, or at least improvable. And work hard at your dreams and your hopes, because some of them will come true. They will live, they will grow, and they will improve your personal space in this universe. That'll be good for your soul. Now about this sermon. Maybe it was